The sun over Redemption Creek didn't shine. It punished. It baked the dust into a fine powder that coated everything, including the woman sitting at the very edge of town, right where civilization gave up. Her name was Martha Henderson. She was 32 years old, and she was worthless. Every soul in town agreed on that. Barren as the desert, the church ladies would whisper, pulling their children closer as if it were a sickness you could catch. Cursed, the men would mutter into their whiskey at the saloon. Martha's fingers felt for the small wooden cross at her neck. It was a wedding gift from a husband who walked out on her 3 winters ago, leaving her with nothing but his name and the town's scorn. Her stomach seized up with a familiar gnawing hunger. The general store owner had shaken his head last week. No more credit. He had a family to feed, he said, looking right through her. The smell of fresh bread from Murphy's bakery drifted on the hot wind, a special kind of torture. She was all sharp angles now, her body whittled down under a faded calico dress. The green of her eyes was still there, but it was a desperate, defiant green. A last spark in the embers. Martha Henderson. The voice was deep, like boots crunching on gravel. She looked up, and a man's shadow fell over her. It was a big shadow, and she couldn't tell if it was a promise or a threat. Thomas Kane stood there, the most powerful rancher in 3 counties, a man who looked like he'd been carved out of the same rock as the mountains behind his land. He was weathered, hard, and rich enough to buy the whole town if he felt like it. "Mr. Kane," she rasped. Her voice was dry from disuse. His eyes were a pale, piercing blue. They looked at her like he was seeing every last secret she had. "You're dying." It wasn't a question. It was a fact. Martha pushed herself up, her chin high, trying to find a dignity she hadn't felt in years. "I'm surviving." "No." He didn't move. "You're fading. And this whole town is just sitting here, watching you do it, like vultures." The word stung because it was the truest thing anyone had said to her in a long time. They were just waiting for her to fall. The barren woman, the failed wife. "What do you want, Mr. Kane?" she asked, swaying on her feet. He reached out and caught her elbow. His grip was like iron, but there was a strange gentleness to it she didn't expect. "I'm here to make you an offer." Her breath hitched. Thomas Kane was known for 2 things: his endless herds of cattle and the fact that his word was unbreakable. Men twice his size got out of his way. Women, even the married ones, found reasons to be wherever he was. "I don't have anything you could possibly want," she whispered, the words tasting like dust. His gaze swept over her hollow cheeks and trembling hands. Then his eyes stopped and they settled on her flat belly, the very source of all her shame. "You're wrong about that, Martha Henderson." The way he said her full name sent a shiver through her. It wasn't the cold shiver of fear she knew so well. It was something else, something warmer, and a whole lot more dangerous. He held out his hand, a large, calloused hand that had wrangled cattle and built an empire from dust. "Come with me," he said, his voice a low command, "before this town finishes the job." The Caney Ranch wasn't a piece of land. It was a kingdom. It rolled on as far as the eye could see, the fences stretching to the horizon. The house was made of stone and thick timber, a fortress against the harshness of the land. Martha sat in a solid wooden chair in his kitchen. She held a warm cup of coffee in both hands, the first real coffee she'd had in a year. The smell alone was a miracle. He moved around the kitchen with a quiet efficiency that surprised her. He cooked bacon, beans, and cornbread, and the room filled with the scent of life, the scent of plenty. When he set a plate in front of her, it was piled so high with food she almost cried. "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He sat down across from her. "Eat first. We'll talk after." She meant to eat slowly, to be a lady, But her hunger was a wild animal. She ate like she'd been starving, because she had been. She didn't look up until the plate was clean. When she did, he was just watching her. No judgment in those pale blue eyes, just watching. "You asked why," he said, his voice calm. "It's a fair question." "I need a wife," he said. The words were as plain and solid as the table between them. "This ranch needs a woman, and I need legitimacy." Her fork, which she had been cleaning with a piece of cornbread, clattered onto the plate. "I don't understand." "The folks in town whisper," he said, leaning back. "A man my age, with all this, and no wife, they get ideas. They start asking questions a man doesn't want to answer." The meaning was clear. A bachelor with power and money was a target for suspicion, a curiosity that could curdle into something ugly. "So you want a marriage," she said slowly, "for convenience?" "More than that." His voice got lower, more intense. "I want children, heirs to all this." Her hand went to her stomach, an old, painful reflex. "Then you've picked the wrong woman, Mr. Kane. I'm barren. Everyone in Redemption Creek knows it." He stood up. He walked around the table until he was standing right behind her. Before she could react, he reached down and placed his large, warm hand directly over hers, pressing it against her flat belly. A jolt, hot as lightning, shot through her. "What everyone knows," he said, his voice a low rumble right by her ear, "and what's true aren't always the same thing." She looked up at him, her heart starting to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "My husband. We tried for 7 years. Your husband was a weak fool who blamed you for his own shortcomings." His hand pressed a little harder, a gesture of pure possession. "A real man doesn't give up." The heat from his palm felt like it was sinking right through the thin fabric of her dress, right into her soul. No one had ever touched her like this. Not with anger, not with pity, but with certainty, as if he knew a secret about her own body that she didn't. "This is crazy," she breathed, but she didn't pull away. "Maybe," he said. His thumb began to move in a small, slow circle over her dress. "But this is the kind of crazy that builds empires." Tears pricked her eyes. "And what if I am? What if I'm broken and months go by and nothing happens?" He knelt beside her chair then, so his eyes were level with hers. His hand never left her. "Then we will have tried. Together." "But Martha," he said, his voice rough with a conviction that defied all logic, "I don't believe you're broken. I believe you've just never been properly claimed." His eyes held a cold, calculating glint she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just faith. It was certainty. An unnerving, absolute confidence that made her wonder, how could he possibly be so sure? They were married by a traveling circuit judge 2 days later. The only witnesses were Miguel, Thomas's grizzled foreman, and his quiet wife, Maria. It was a transaction, signed and sealed. Martha Henderson was gone. Now she was Martha Kane. Life on the ranch was a strange dream. Thomas gave her the large master bedroom, while he took a smaller room at the end of the hall. He was a perfect gentleman. Almost too perfect. She gained weight. The hollows in her cheeks filled out. The new dresses he'd bought for her in another town, far from the judging eyes of Redemption Creek, fit a body that was becoming strong again. She was no longer a ghost, but there was a coldness to their arrangement that chilled her. He treated her like a prized mare he'd just purchased. He made sure she was well fed, well rested and comfortable. He watched her constantly, not with the heat of a new husband, but with the focused expectation of a farmer watching his fields, waiting for the first sprout. One evening she was walking past his office and heard voices, Thomas and Miguel. She paused, pressing her ear to the heavy wooden door. "Any news?" Miguel's voice was low. Patience, Miguel. It's only been 3 weeks, Thomas replied, his voice tight with something she couldn't name. Annoyance? Impatience? But the doctor, Miguel started. He said, the doctor said it could take a month or two, Thomas cut him off. She's healthier now. We just have to wait. The blood drained from Martha's face. The doctor? What doctor? She had never seen a doctor. Not with Thomas. Not for years. A cold dread began to seep into her bones. This wasn't a gamble. This wasn't a leap of faith based on some gut feeling he had about her. This was a plan. He had consulted a doctor before he ever approached her, before he found her starving at the edge of town. He hadn't just saved her. He had selected her. But why? The fear was a new and unwelcome companion. It followed her through the big, quiet house. It sat with her at the dinner table as she watched her new husband eat, in silence. Who was this man, really? What did he want from her? She had to know. The woman who had been too weak to fight back in Redemption Creek was gone. This new Martha, the one fed by Thomas Kane's food and clothed in his fabrics, had a strength she hadn't felt in a long, long time. And she was going to use it. She started watching him back. She noticed the way he always locked his office door when he left. She noticed the small, heavy key he kept on his keyring, separate from the others. One afternoon, when he and Miguel rode out to the far pastures to check on a sick calf, she knew it was her chance. She found his keys hanging on a hook by the door. Her hands trembled as she took them. The small, heavy key slid into the lock of his office door. It turned with a satisfying click. The office was a man's room. It smelled of leather, tobacco, and money. A large desk dominated the space. She went straight to it, her heart hammering. She tried the drawers. All of them were open, except for one, the bottom drawer on the right. It was locked. She found a letter opener on the desk and went to work, prying at the lock. The wood splintered, but finally it gave. She pulled the drawer open. Inside was a leather-bound folder. She opened it. There were medical papers, detailed charts and notes from a Dr. Alistair Finch in a city 100 miles away. They were about fertility, about herbs and treatments to help a woman conceive. But the name at the top of the papers wasn't hers. It was a woman named Elena. Beneath the medical papers were letters. Business letters, it seemed at first. But the language was strange. They were between Thomas and another man. They spoke of a debt long overdue and of Henderson's great folly. Henderson, her ex-husband's name. A chill ran down her spine. What did her husband have to do with Thomas Kane? At the very bottom of the drawer, beneath everything else, was a single faded photograph. She picked it up. It was a picture of two young men, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One of them was a much younger Thomas Kane, his face less weathered, but his eyes the same piercing blue. The other man, her breath caught in her throat. The other man was her husband, James Henderson. This changed everything. They weren't strangers. They weren't just the rancher and the town drunk's ex-wife. They had a history, a secret history, and she was standing right in the middle of it. That evening, the silence at the dinner table was heavier than usual. Martha could barely eat. She kept seeing that photograph in her mind, Thomas and James, smiling like brothers. She couldn't hold it in any longer. She put her fork down. "Thomas," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Who is Elena?" He didn't look up from his plate. "I don't know anyone by that name." "Don't lie to me," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I was in your office. I saw the papers, Dr. Finch's papers." His head snapped up. His eyes were cold, hard chips of ice. For the first time, she saw a flicker of the ruthless man everyone in the county feared. "You had no right to go in my office." "I have every right," she shot back. "I'm your wife. You brought me here under some pretense with secrets you refused to tell me. Who is she?" He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then the hardness in his face seemed to crumble, replaced by a deep, ancient sadness. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "Elena," he said, his voice now rough with emotion, "was my sister." Martha froze. This was not what she expected. "She was my younger sister," he went on, his eyes distant. She was unable to have children. It broke her heart. It broke my father's heart. He wanted heirs for this ranch more than anything. I spent years and a small fortune talking to doctors, researching treatments, trying to find a way to help her." He looked at Martha, his eyes pleading. "That's how I knew about Dr. Finch. That's why, when I saw you in town, I had a feeling. I knew that what happened to Elena, it didn't have to happen to you. I knew your husband was the problem, not you. It was a beautiful story, a tragic, romantic story. It explained everything. His certainty, his knowledge. It painted him not as a cold calculator, but as a wounded man trying to build the family he'd lost, and she wanted so desperately to believe it." Later that night he came to her room. He stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the hall light. "I shouldn't have kept it from you," he said. "I'm sorry, I don't talk about her." He stepped into the room. He walked to her bed. He sat on the edge and took her hand. "I know this started as an arrangement, Martha, but it's become more than that for me. I've come to care for you, deeply." He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss at the fence line. This was gentle, questioning, and all the fear, all the suspicion she'd felt melted away under the warmth of his lips. She kissed him back, pouring all her loneliness and newfound hope into it. That night, for the first time, he didn't go back to his room at the end of the hall. He stayed with her. He showed her a passion and a tenderness she had only ever dreamed of. For the first time in her life, Martha felt cherished. She felt loved. She let herself believe that her broken life was finally mended. The next morning, she woke up alone in the big bed. The sheets next to her were still warm. She smiled, feeling a happiness so pure it almost hurt. Thomas was already out, starting his day's work. She got dressed, feeling like a new woman. She went to his room to fetch his work clothes from the day before to be washed. As she picked up his trousers from the chair where he'd dropped them, his wallet fell out of the pocket. She bent to pick it up. A small, folded piece of paper had fallen out of it. A train ticket. Her hands started to shake as she unfolded it. It was a ticket to the city where Dr. Finch had his office. The date stamped on it was from 5 weeks ago. 1 week before the day he'd found her at the edge of Redemption Creek. He hadn't been researching this for his sister years ago. He had just been there. He had been actively planning this right before he came and got her. The beautiful, tragic story he had told her. It was a lie, a fresh one, and she had fallen for it completely. The morning sickness started 2 months later. At first she tried to deny it, but then her body started sending signals she couldn't ignore. A tenderness in her breasts, a sudden aversion to the smell of coffee. The signs she had prayed for every single day of her first marriage were finally here. She was with child. Her first reaction was not joy, but a cold, sharp fear. This was it. This was what Thomas wanted. The final piece of his plan had just fallen into place. Now that he had what he wanted, what would happen to her? She thought about his lies, the story about his sister, Elena, the train ticket. She still didn't know the truth, but she knew this child was at the center of it. She waited a week before she told him. She had to. He would notice soon enough. She found him in the barn, mending a saddle. She stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around her middle. "Thomas," she said. He looked up. "Martha, is everything all right?" "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice flat. "I'm pregnant." The change in him was immediate and absolute. The serious, calculating rancher vanished. A look of pure, unadulterated joy lit up his face. He dropped the saddle, rushed to her, and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around until she felt dizzy. "I knew it," he shouted, his voice echoing in the barn. "I knew it. We did it, Martha. We did it." He set her down gently, his hands cupping her face. There were tears in his pale blue eyes. Real tears. He looked so happy, so genuinely overcome with emotion, that her own carefully constructed walls began to crumble. Could she have been wrong? Maybe the lie about the train ticket had a simple explanation. Maybe he really did just want a family. Maybe his happiness was real. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of that same joy. His child. Their child. 3 weeks later, he insisted they ride into Redemption Creek. "It's time," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "I want everyone to see my beautiful, glowing wife." As they rode down the town's main street, everything stopped. People came out of the stores to stare. The same women who had crossed the street to avoid her now watched with wide, shocked eyes. She wasn't the gaunt, pathetic creature they remembered. She was Mrs. Thomas Kane, dressed in fine clothes, her body just beginning to show the gentle swell of new life. At the general store, Thomas kept his arm possessively around her waist. "Afternoon, folks," he boomed to the silent room. "My wife and I need to order some supplies. We're setting up a nursery." A collective gasp went through the store. The barren woman was with child. It was a miracle, a scandal, a triumph. The whispers started instantly, a current of awe and disbelief. For a moment, Martha felt a sweet, satisfying sense of victory. She had won. She had proven them all wrong. As they were leaving the store, loading their supplies into the wagon, a man stumbled out of the saloon across the street. He was drunk, his clothes were ragged, and he hadn't shaved in a week. He shielded his eyes against the sun, squinting at the wagon. His eyes fell on Martha. They widened in disbelief. "Martha," he slurred. The voice hit her like a physical blow. She froze, her blood turning to ice. She knew that voice. It was her husband, James Henderson. He wasn't gone. He hadn't disappeared 3 winters ago. He was right here. He'd been here all along, hiding in the shadows of the town she had just returned to in triumph. And he was looking straight at her. Thomas moved so fast she barely saw it. 1 second he was beside her, the next he was standing in front of her, a human shield. His body was tense, his hand resting on the Colt revolver at his hip. James Henderson let out a wet, ugly laugh. "Well, well, if it ain't the king of the county, and look what you got there." His eyes flickered to Martha's belly. "Took you long enough, Martha. Had to find a man with richer soil, did you?" The townspeople, who had been watching the scene from the storefronts, drew closer. This was better than a traveling show. The town's greatest shame and its most powerful man, face to face in the dusty street. "Get out of my wife's sight," Thomas said. His voice was dangerously low, a growl that promised violence. James just smirked, a crooked, broken grin. "Your wife? That's funny. 'Cause last I checked, that circuit judge who married us was so drunk he probably used the papers to light his cigar. According to the law of God and man, she's still Mrs. James Henderson." A wave of nausea rolled over Martha. Was it possible? Could he be right? James took a shaky step forward, pointing a grimy finger at her. His eyes were filled with a greedy, triumphant light. "And that means," he said, his voice rising for all to hear, "that the baby she's carrying is a Henderson. It's mine, and I've come back to claim what's mine." The ride back to the ranch was silent and terrifying. The sanctuary Thomas had built for her felt like a cage, and the world was pressing in. "Is it true?" she finally asked, her voice trembling as they entered the house. "Could he still be my husband?" Thomas didn't answer. He just walked to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a whiskey, his face a grim mask. "I'll handle Henderson," he said, downing the drink in one gulp. His tone scared her more than James's threats. This wasn't just about protecting his wife. This was personal. That night, sleep was impossible. The house was too quiet. Around midnight, she got up. Thomas wasn't in his room. A sliver of light from under the barn door caught her eye. She pulled a shawl over her nightgown and crept outside. The air was cold, the stars unnervingly bright. As she got closer to the barn, she heard voices. A low murmur from Thomas, and then a pained grunt. She peered through a crack in the wooden wall. The scene inside made her stomach clench. James Henderson was tied to a chair in the middle of the barn. His face was bruised and swollen, a trickle of blood running from his lip. Miguel stood in the shadows, his arms crossed, and Thomas stood over James, his sleeves rolled up, his knuckles raw. "You were supposed to be gone," Thomas said, his voice a low hiss. "I paid you. I paid you a fortune to disappear and never come back. That was the deal." Martha's world tilted on its axis. He paid him. James spat a wad of blood onto the dirt floor. He looked up at Thomas and laughed, a gurgling, painful sound. "The deal changed. Your money ran out. A man gets thirsty," he coughed. "And then I hear the news. Thomas Caney, the great rancher, married my barren little Martha. And I thought to myself, now why would he do that? He must know something I don't." James's eyes gleamed with a desperate cunning. "So I waited. I watched. And look what I found. You didn't just marry her. You fixed her. You got yourself a little gold mine." He leaned forward as much as the ropes would allow. "And now," he rasped, "it's our little gold mine." Thomas paid him to abandon her. The thought echoed in the screaming silence of her mind as she stumbled back to the house. He didn't save her. He bought her. He saw her starving, saw her at her lowest point, and he didn't see a woman to be rescued. He saw an opportunity, an asset to be acquired. He cleared the board by paying off her husband. Then he moved in and claimed his prize. Every kind word, every tender touch, every moment she had allowed herself to believe she was safe and loved. It was all part of the transaction. A lie built on a foundation of money and deceit. The story about his sister, the passion in their bed, the joy on his face when she told him she was pregnant. All of it, a performance. She was waiting for him in the main room when he came back in. He was wiping blood from his knuckles with a rag. He stopped when he saw her. She didn't say a word. She just held up the faded photograph, the picture of him and James, young and smiling. "What was the real deal, Thomas?" she asked, her voice hollow. "What was the real price you paid for me?" He looked from the photograph to her face, and he knew. He knew she had heard. The mask of the gentle husband fell away, and all that was left was the cold, hard rancher. "My sister's name was Elena," he began, his voice flat and devoid of the emotion he'd faked before. "And James Henderson was going to marry her. He courted her for a year. He got her with child." Martha stared at him, horrified. "He promised her everything," Thomas continued, his eyes burning with a hatred that was terrifying in its intensity. "And then your family came to town. Your father was wealthier than mine was then. James saw a better opportunity. He dropped Eleanor like she was nothing. He married you instead." He took a step closer. The shame of it, the town whispering. It destroyed her. 6 months after he married you, my sister Elena walked into the river and never came out. The air left Martha's lungs. She was not just a tool. She was the weapon, the unwitting instrument of his revenge. "For 10 years, Thomas seethed. "I watched him. I watched him drink your father's money away. I watched him grow cruel and weak. I watched him blame you for his own failures, call you barren, just like he told everyone Elena was. And I planned. I planned my perfect revenge." His voice dropped to a whisper, but it was more terrifying than any shout. My plan was to take everything from him, to give you, his worthless, barren wife, everything he ever wanted and couldn't have. A home, wealth, and a child, an heir. That baby inside you isn't just my son, Martha. He is my justice. He is the final proof that James Henderson is nothing. Her heart shattered. So I was just a pawn, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. A womb to be used in your decade-long war? You were... He never finished the sentence. A loud crack echoed from outside. A gunshot. The door burst open and Miguel stumbled in, clutching his arm. Patron, it's Henderson. He got loose. He's brought men from town. James hadn't just escaped. He'd gone back to the saloon and rounded up every desperate, drunk thug he could find, promising them a share of the Caney fortune. They were attacking the ranch. The night exploded into chaos. Gunshots shattered the windows of the fortress Thomas had built. Men were shouting, their drunken calls echoing in the darkness. Thomas became a different person. The vengeful schemer, the deceptive husband, they were gone. In their place was a commander. He and Miguel barricaded the doors, using heavy furniture. He moved with a deadly calm, a man born for this kind of violence. He shoved a heavy Winchester rifle into Martha's hands. You know how to use this. Stay down. Stay away from the windows. He didn't even look at her as he spoke. He was already aiming his own rifle through a crack in the barricade. She crouched behind a large sofa, her mind reeling. She was trapped. Trapped in a war between two men who had both used her, betrayed her, and thrown her life away for their own selfish reasons. And then a sharp, searing pain ripped through her belly. She gasped, doubling over. It couldn't be. It was too soon. But another wave of pain, stronger this time, seized her. The stress, the terror. It was forcing the baby to come. Now, in the middle of a gunfight. Thomas fired a shot, then glanced back, his face grim. He saw her, her face pale with agony. The cold, focused mask of the fighter cracked. For the first time, a look of pure, raw terror filled his eyes. Martha. In that single moment, seeing her crumpled in pain, his entire world of revenge and justice and decade-long plans seemed to burn away. All that was left was her. He didn't just need her for his plan. He didn't just want her for his child. He loved her, and his obsession had just put her, and the baby, directly in the path of a bullet. "Miguel, hold them!" Thomas roared, abandoning his post at the window. He scrambled over to Martha, his hands hovering over her, unsure what to do. The sounds of the gunfight faded into the background. All he could see was her pain. "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice breaking. "Martha, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this. I never meant for you to get hurt." Another contraction tore through her, and she cried out. He grabbed her hand, his grip desperate. Suddenly, a crash came from the back of the house, the sound of a window shattering. A moment later, James Henderson appeared in the doorway of the room. He was wild-eyed, a bloody gash on his forehead. He held a pistol in his hand, and it was aimed squarely at Thomas. "Looks like the party's starting without me," he sneered, his eyes darting to Martha on the floor. "Kid's coming, huh? Perfect timing. I'll take him, the ranch, and everything else you owe me." He raised his gun. "No!" Thomas yelled, moving to shield Martha with his own body. But Martha still had the Winchester. Her hands were shaking, her body was screaming in agony, but a strange calm washed over her. All the years of being called worthless, all the whispers, all the scorn, all the manipulations by these two men, it all coalesced into a single point of cold, hard rage. James saw the rifle in her hands and laughed, that same ugly, dismissive laugh. "Put that down, you stupid woman. You haven't got the nerve. You're nothing without a man pulling your strings." That was it. That was the final lie she would ever let him tell. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she lifted the heavy rifle. She looked him dead in the eye, and she pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. James Henderson staggered back, a look of pure shock on his face. He dropped his pistol, clutched at his chest, and fell to the floor. Silence. Outside, the shooting faltered. The attackers, hearing the final shot and losing their leader, began to scatter into the night. Thomas stared, first at the body of his old enemy, then at Martha, the woman lying on his floor, in the throes of labor, holding a smoking rifle. A look of profound awe, of stunned respect, crossed his face. He had spent 10 years planning to save her, to use her to prove a point. But in the end, she hadn't needed a savior. She had just saved them all. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale, bloody light across the bullet-scarred room, their son was born. He was healthy, loud, and utterly unaware of the chaos he had entered. By noon, the sheriff from the next county had arrived. It was quickly ruled self-defense. When the story came out, the whole ugly story of James Henderson, his betrayal of Elena Caney, his abuse of Martha, and the final, desperate attack, the town of Redemption Creek had its final verdict. Thomas and Martha Caney were heroes. James Henderson was the villain he had always been. A week later, Thomas sat Martha down at the big kitchen table. He placed a stack of legal documents in front of her. "What is this?" she asked. "It's the deed to half the ranch," he said, his voice quiet. "And papers giving you control of half my assets. It's all in your name, legally, irrevocably." She stared at him. "A gift?" "No," he said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "It's not a gift. It's what you're owed. This was never my victory, Martha. It was yours. You're the strongest person I have ever known." Their life began again that day, not on a foundation of lies or revenge, but on a hard-won truth. They were not a master and his possession. They were partners, equals, forged in blood and fire. Months later, they sat on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. Thomas was holding their son, Samuel. Martha rested her head on his shoulder, a feeling of peace settling into her bones for the first time in her life. She looked out at the vast expanse of land, her land, and knew her worth had never been for a man to decide. It wasn't something to be given or taken or bartered for. It was something she had to claim for herself, with a rifle in her hand and the future in her heart. If you believe a person's worth is their own to claim, and you were on the edge of your seat through this story of justice, then make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales of the unexpected.